a decision that they would accept the boundaries and all the anomalies and they wouldn't fight over it. So they'd accept the existing colonial boundaries. I thought that that was the height of maturity, in the sense that imperialism always leaves behind so many points of argument and dispute that it means that people can't progress. It seemed to me from what you were saying that in fact you don't accept that decision, and you are suggesting that there should be some other way forward. Perhaps you could just elaborate.
Okay, this lady here in the middle. Do we only have one mic? Is there a second mic around?
Joko, and I come from Switzerland, and I'm part of an organization called Don't Be Blind This Time, and I'm Congolese. First of all, I would like to say something because it has been spoken about civil war in Congo, and I would like just people to know that this is not a civil war. You've been talking about imperialism and how it affects countries in Africa. So I think it would be wrong to talk about a civil war because there is a war of aggression, and that is done by Rwanda, which is a proxy, I would say, state from the imperialism. So my question is, how far would you like to go as to set a new narrative on Africa? Because there is a problem, of course, of narrative when we talk about the Great Lakes region and what happened in Rwanda in 1994. And this is a question that must be addressed. And the narrative that is, I would say, in fashion now is not really what we Congolese people and certain Rwandan peoples are thinking, what the situation was. So how far are you willing to go as to try to make that narrative change? Because if we talk about the genocide, a lot has to be said. This is not what people are saying today. So this is my question. Thank you.
And one more contribution.
Great to hear what the guy was saying. The question is I wanted to ask is there is any resistance? Is there is uprising? I would like to know how to get more information about it, because I was hoping when revolution in Egypt and Tunisia, I thought it started to spread down. I would like to get any information about any grassroots movements. Happening in Africa. Thanks.
For the OAU was a compromise structure. Before the OAU, there were two blocks in conflict, the Casablanca bloc and the Monrovia bloc. And at the OAU meeting in Addis Ababa, Nkrumah and some others actually did not agree that they should just adopt the boundaries the way in which the OAU adopted it. In 1997, Julius Nyerere, who was for the adoption of the boundaries, was in Ghana on the 40th anniversary of Ghana's independence, and pointed out that he saw that people like him were wrong. So he sat in the meeting. I didn't sit there. Julius Nyerere lived in 1997 to say that he was wrong. And the fact is that there are border wars in Africa as a result of that kind of arrangement. And so it is not me saying that there should be another way, but the reality and practice has shown that there should be another way. And so that is so one can decide to bury their heads like ostriches in sand and say that they are not looking at the reality, but reality is important to be faced. With the situation in Congo, in fact, I thought that what I meant by the intervention and the Mutuera meant that imperialists intervened in Congo. I didn't see it, and I see the issue of the Congo and all the other issues that I referred to, not just as an issue of the people in the colonially created territories, but as issues of all Africans. And that I think that they shouldn't just be seen as issues, isolated issues, but they are also a reflection of the general situation on the African continent. That is the context within which I see it. And the fact that it is precisely because of this that some of us have taken the global initiative, for example, to organize education in such a way that the one we have within the establishment, there should be an alternative to it. I remember it is Kataji Woodson, the African American, who says that there are two ways of teaching, what somebody else has taught you and what you teach yourself. And he pointed out that what you teach yourself is a response to your own demand. But what somebody teaches you is used to serve that person's interest. The kind of narrative we've had over the years has been a narrative to serve the interest of the imperialists, to serve the interest of the interventionists. And so we have to self-organize a different narrative which will inform the world differently and which inform younger people who might have been misled by the earlier narrative. That is what the way I see it. And also here, we as Africans who, even among Africans, there are those who just accept what has been given by the colonial order, the first form of teaching that Kataji Woodson refers to. So it is important that we have to build structures which will educate people differently. We have to also help structures like the Stop the War Question and this campaign of Scramble for Africa, so that people within Britain as well can be informed differently. In terms of resistance, I know there's not enough time, but I'll suggest one book, which I know it's around. The African Awakening, The Emerging Revolutions, edited by Firoz Manji and Sokari Akin. I've written a chapter in that. And that will give you a lot of information from country to country about what has been happening in Africa. I always tell people everywhere I go that there is nowhere where there's oppression and there is no resistance. And so I found it frequent that in many places they say there's no news about resistance in Africa. And the Africans are just as human as all people are in everywhere. So oppression means resistance. And the book, which will be very easy to get anywhere, can help give a lot of details on what is happening in Africa from country to country.
Thank you. Very briefly, because Expo's dealt with most of the points. On the question on the OAU, Organisation of African Unity, and its acceptance of colonial boundaries, it's true they did, and that was, in a sense, quite a big retreat away from the principles of Pan-Africanism being promoted by particularly Kwame Nkrumah, but many others at the Chorlton-cum-Hardy conference in Britain in 1945 and subsequent conferences. But it's not really true that the OAU, or now African Union, have subscribed to that view. When you think that there has been a number of independence movements within African countries, such as South Sudan, Eritrea. You could almost argue Namibia was at one time being, Southwest Africa was administered fairly closely with South Africa, and then two countries were formed on the end of apartheid. And the current issue of the Western Sahara, which was a Spanish colony and was then, after a war, was occupied by Morocco, and the Western Sahara people, the Sahrawi people, are for the most part living in refugee camps in Algeria, as they have been since 1975. So there are enormous issues there which are unresolved by that, and they're probably going to get worse and could be a flashpoint for other things. The other point on Congo, thanks, fair point, I accept your point, absolutely on that. The oppression in the Congo is appalling, and the way in which the Western countries have armed and financed Rwanda in particular, and there is clearly a long-term agenda by a number of people to entice Eastern Congo towards East Africa by both economic and economic development through infrastructure projects, as well as mineral exploitation. And the losers in this are the women who suffer grievously in Eastern Congo, where rape is a weapon of war against the people there, and the militias, which are in reality funded by mineral companies somewhere along the line. It's horrible, horrible situation that's going on there. So we have to have some understanding of that. And the weird thing is, the world's media obviously report what's happening in the Middle East, fine, and so they should. They report what's in Afghanistan and Iraq, absolutely, I'm not complaining. But the death rate and the loss of life in the DRC is far greater than all of the other conflicts in the world put together. You're talking of the millions of people that have died either directly in the conflict or as a result of disruption and disease spread by that conflict. And it's largely unreported by the world's media. So we have to have that understanding and that solidarity. And also remember the colonial legacy. In every case, in every country where there's colonial masters, they have always practiced a promotion and demotion of particular linguistic groups, ethnic groups, national groups, in order to be able to better to control the place. And that legacy lives on in many, many other parts of Africa and is still being exploited by the West and by the Western economic interests.
Okay. We've got about 10 minutes before we need to wind up, so I'll take another couple of contributions from the floor. There's a lady right down here at the front, and just whilst the mic is coming down to her, just to let people know there is a campaign if the mic can come down to this lady at the front here, there is a campaign which is taking place in Britain and other parts of the world called Don't Be Blind, as was pointed out, which is about actually highlighting and the issues and what's happening in the Congo and the Congo region. If anybody is interested in that, if you speak to myself, there's a brother and a sister here on my right in the audience. If you come to us afterwards, we can tell you about that. But that is a campaign which anybody in this room can get involved in. Okay? This lady here.
Hello, I'd like you to expand further on how you view the role of the Chinese in Africa, and in particular, whether you feel their motives and methods differ in any way from any of the other powers that are now involved in this scramble for Africa.
Okay, is there anybody else who'd like to ask a question? We do need to wrap up, as I said, but is there any final...
And I saw divide and rule beautifully executed by the white minority that ran Africa. And that is seen again and again. Some of you may have heard of the Jameson raid that was rigged, very similar to like weapons of mass destruction, on the discovery of gold. Once gold was discovered on the Rand, Britain had to lay claim to that, largely through the much venerated Cecil Rhodes, had a university named after him, and quite frankly he could have shown Al Capone a thing or two. Okay? The whole business of when the Western powers move into any country, if there isn't oil, diamonds or gold, it's not interested. So the pretext of going to establish democracy or seeing fair play and all that is a load of baloney. It's down to cui bono. Who benefits out of this? If they can benefit out of it, they'll send the troops in. And that's all I believe in terms of Africa. It's tragic to see the exploitation that has taken place right back to the days of slavery. And it's just a new form of slavery that's taken over.
Involved in mineral exploitation in Africa, usually it's accompanied by a degree of infrastructure investment, which sounds very generous and with great largesse, but in reality, building a railway line or a road that leads from a mine to a port could be construed as being mainly in the interest of getting the minerals out of the ground into the port, unless I've misunderstood the motive entirely, which is of course possible. And so I think one has to recognise that the Chinese companies might do it slightly differently, but there are huge issues about the training or lack of training of African workers to operate in those places, and the pricing that is paid, and also the huge degree of soft loans that are made to certain countries in return for purchasing of Chinese goods over the next X number of years, or the supply of minerals or oil at a fixed price. So for example, there was a massive $2 billion loan made to Angola in about 6 years ago, I think it was, maybe I might not be right on the exact date, the price paid by China for the oil from Angola remains unrevealed, and the amount of goods that have to be bought from China in return remains unrevealed. And so you have a relationship there that is extremely unclear to an awful lot of people, and that is repeated elsewhere across the continent. And I think that the political relationship is slightly different in the sense that China doesn't as overtly interfere in local politics as the way in which Americans or British traditionally have, but certainly the economic pull is enormous, so that when the Chinese Prime Minister invited African leaders to come to a conference in Beijing on future trade with Africa, I think I'm right in saying every single country attended, bar none. They wouldn't attend any other conference, bar none, anywhere in the world, even for the UN, I doubt. So that was a sign of just how powerful the Chinese purchasing is. The other point that was made about South Africa, yes, the Jamestown raid and what went with it, and Cecil Rhodes. But remember, that came actually, Rhodes and the establishment of Fort Salisbury, and he didn't just have a town and a university named after him, he had several countries named after himself as well, Rhodesia, both north and south. He was also a member of the British Parliament, so he wasn't the first or last corrupt person to be in the British Parliament. That came after the Congress of Berlin. That was 1884. Fort Salisbury was established from memory 1890. That was the founding of Rhodesia. And so the history is certainly there. My concluding thought is this. I'm really pleased we've got this quite short session on Africa today. I recommend you buy the book that Expo talked about, and also since you've all registered for Stop the War, I'll be able to get hold of email addresses that way, if I may, if you're happy about it. Circulate the information about the Liberation meeting we're holding on Africa on January the 14th, and those that wish to come, of course, will be most welcome to attend that, because we've got to recognise the new imperialism is about political control, is about mineral exploitation, is about land grabbing. It's not that different to exactly what happened during what was seen as the height of the colonial era in the late 19th through to the mid-20th century. My sorrow is that the joy of all those people that fought for and obtained independence in the 1950s and 1960s was largely destroyed on the altar of high oil prices, high interest rates, World Bank intervention and World Bank economic modelling, which has destroyed the economic independence of so much of Africa. And I think these are issues that we have to concentrate on, because they also lead to the military interventions.
Going straight to the issue of China, once there is economic control of any people, then automatically there's political impotence. And apart from what we've been talking about, another strange development in the case of China has been, in addition to the formal economic arrangements, the coming in of illegal Chinese migrants and who do illegal mining. In fact, Ghana, in which I live, is one of the places, I think people might have seen it in the news, where people confronting even the illegal Chinese miners have been confronted with guns. Chinese have used guns to confront people in Ghana in particular, and it's been a great embarrassment even for the Chinese embassy in Ghana about this. I don't know whether that's repeated across other countries, but that's specific from our country. The issue of democracy, in fact, there is no form of democracy that can be introduced by other external forces to anybody. The fact that true democracy can only develop from within the people themselves. And one thing we want to point out is that Africans have also been fighting to ensure that they have control of their resources. They've been fighting through social movements and that. And just like during the anti-apartheid struggle, we had the anti-apartheid movement here. I think that groups like the Stop the War Coalition, other groups where we find a common way of working, fighting against negative causes, we should be able to solidarize and have the movements which are standing for the interests of the people but because of the support of the oppressive governments and the multinationals and all those other external forces here, they push the wrong guys in control. So we have to push the wrong guys out and from below get an alternative. And when that happens, then you will have the people's interest in Africa being advanced. And that is what groups like Kilombo and Don't Be Blind are involved in. We have a number of our people here, we have a number of our members here. After this session, you can approach any of us. I'm sure they can just show them by their hands, so I don't have to call them Don't Be Blind and Kilombo. You see them, Jeremy has always been part of Kilombo. I'm happy he's here, and I'm sure the work that he's been doing with us, when I leave, he will do the same work with my colleagues who are here. We've not done much together of late, so Jeremy, I'm sure you'll be able to. And I'll say thank you all for being here, and thank you all for giving me company at this particular point in time. And this world cannot remain like this. It can change.
Just to wrap up, a few final words from me. As the two speakers have so eloquently said, and I'll use the phrase, another world is possible, but in order for that different world to be achieved, it needs the input of everybody who has, and I'll use the term, thirst for social justice, because that's what it's about. It's about changing the world so every man, woman and child, the ordinary people who walk the streets of Britain, Africa, as an African I'm particularly concerned for Africa, enjoy the fruits of their labour, enjoy the fruits of the land. We've been told by Blair, Bush, Cameron, Obama, notice Conservatives and Labour, Republicans and Democrats, we're told there's so much, this is the democracy, that there is a war on terror. I'd like us all to go away with a thought about what is terror. For me, war is terror. For those children in the Congo, the women in Liberia, Sierra Leone, people across the world who are terrorized and have been terrorized day in, day out by remote-controlled drones, like people are sitting down playing PlayStations, by the West using puppets in Africa and different parts of the world to wage their wars. They know that war is terror. And again, if all of us in this room have that thirst for social justice, we won't just come to this conference here today and go away. What we will do is go away and think about the next step we can each take to make that other world possible. And thank you for listening.